New York City, a torrential downpour, the neon lights bleeding across the wet asphalt like blood. I was the lowest of the low, a parking valet at the Alliance Club. I just scratched the fender of Carter Thorne's Bentley, and for that, they were holding me down in the gutter, about to break my leg. A delicate hand emerged from the car's tinted window, tossing a check into the grime. "Let him go," a cool voice said. "Consider my tip." That was Isabel Sterling, the city's most celebrated socialite. Carter Thorne's fiancée. 10 years later, the Thorne empire crumbled. She fell from her ivory tower, becoming a beautiful spectacle in a gilded cage. Her name whispered in scandal. I had climbed to the top over the shoulders of countless men, trading blood and sweat for a tailored suit in a corner office, in a VIP lounge thick with the smell of whiskey and cigar smoke. I tipped her chin up with my finger and emptied a briefcase of cash onto the table. "Miss Sterling," I said, "the tip you gave me, I'm returning it with interest. The rules are different now. I make them one. Waste him." Carter Thorne's voice cut through the curtain of rain, dripping with the casual cruelty of the powerful. Two stone-faced bodyguards pinned my shoulders to the pavement. My face was pressed against the cold, gritty concrete. Mud and rainwater filled my mouth, the foul taste choking me. It was 1994 and New York was drowning in a summer storm. My name was Leo and I was just another anonymous valet at the Alliance, the most exclusive nightclub in Manhattan. 3 minutes earlier, blinded by the sheeting rain, I had backed a guest car into the bumper of a black Bentley. It was just a scratch, a faint line on the polished chrome. But to Carter Thorne, the heir to the Thorne fortune, that scratch was worth more than my life. "Mr. Thorne, I'll pay for it. I swear I'll pay for it," I begged, my voice as I struggled against the iron grips. I knew it was useless. In this world, a poor kid's life was dirt cheap. A rich man's car was priceless. A gleaming Italian loafer pressed down on the back of my hand, grinding it into the asphalt. I heard the small, sickening crunch of bones. White-hot pain shot on my arm. I bit down hard on my lip, refusing to scream. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered under the club's awning. Not one of them moved to help. They were smirking, laughing at the stupid kid who didn't know his place. "Do it," Carter said, exhaling a plume of smoke and waving a dismissive hand. "Break his leg. Teach him a lesson." One of the bodyguards raised a steel tire iron. In that moment, I shut my eyes. A wave of despair washing over me. This was it. This was how my life ended. I'd be left to rot in the gutters of a city that eats people like me for breakfast. "Stop." A woman's voice, clear and cold, sliced through the noise. The Bentley's rear window slid halfway down. Straining, I lifted my head through the rain-streaked glass. I saw a profile, skin so pale it seemed to glow, and a detached gaze as if the scene unfolding before her was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It was Isabel Sterling, the only daughter of the Sterling dynasty, the queen of New York high society and Carter Thorne's fiancée. She didn't look at me. She didn't even look at Carter. A slender hand extended from the window. 2 fingers holding a flimsy piece of paper. She let it go. The paper fluttered in the wind, landing in a puddle next to my face. It was a check. The number of zeros on it made my head spin. "For the repairs," she said, her voice even. "And for his medical bills." Her tone wasn't loud, but the bodyguard's tire iron froze in midair. A muscle twitched in Carter's jaw before his scowl morphed into a fawning smile. "Isabel, honey, you don't need to waste your money on this piece of trash." Isabel still didn't turn her head. "It's getting loud out here. Let's go." The window slid shut, sealing her away from the world again. Carter shot me one last venomous glare that promised this wasn't over. He scrambled into the car and the Bentley sped off, spraying me with a final wave of dirty water. The bodyguards released me. I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath, the rain washing over the blood and the grime. The crowd dispersed, their evening's entertainment over. My hands shaking, I plucked the check from the mud. It was soaked through, but the number written on it was enough to buy a dozen lives like mine. I stared in the direction the Bentley had disappeared. That look in her eyes, that look of utter indifference, like she was observing an insect. But I was alive because of her charity. I clenched my fist, my fingernails digging into my palm. The pain kept me focused. I never cashed that check. I dragged my battered body back to my leaky shoebox apartment in Queens. I found a plastic sleeve, the kind for baseball cards, and carefully sealed the check inside. I kept it in my jacket tucked against my chest. It was my shame. It was my armor. The next day, I quit my job. I went to the docks in Brooklyn. It was the roughest, dirtiest place in the city, but it was also a place where a man could disappear and be reborn. I hauled the heaviest crates. I got into the bloodiest fights. I did anything and everything that paid. Anything that let me climb 1 inch higher out of the gutter. Every time I was exhausted enough to die. Every time I was beaten half to death, I would touch the hard plastic rectangle over my heart. I told myself, Leo, you can't die. You have to become someone. You have to stand in front of that woman one day and throw this money back at her face. I had to make her see me. Really see me just once. 3 months later, I saw them on the news announcing their lavish engagement party at the plaza. Isabel was in a white gown, looking impossibly beautiful like an angel. Carter Thorne had his arm wrapped around her waist, a smug, triumphant grin on his face. I sat in my cramped apartment, eating day-old takeout from a greasy carton. The blue light of the TV flickered across my face. My eyes were darker than the city night outside. Just wait, I thought. One day I'm going to tear your whole world down. Time moved fast, too fast to catch your breath. 3 years passed in a blur. New York was a whirlwind. The dot bubble was inflating, making kings out of paupers overnight. I was Leo Vance now, not the kid from the gutter anymore. The money I bled for on the docks. I poured all of it into the stock market. I didn't know anything about candlestick charts or P ratios, but I knew people. Greed and fear, the two most powerful forces on earth. I bet big, I won bigger. My net worth multiplied by 10, then 100. I bought tailored suits, slicked my hair back, and learned to pretend I enjoyed the taste of expensive wine. But I knew I was still an outsider. In the eyes of the old money families, I was just a lucky punk who'd struck it rich. All flash, no class. I started to follow news about Isabel Sterling obsessively. The society pages called her the most envied woman in New York. I knew better. My sources, the ones money could buy, told me Carter Thorne had a string of mistresses all over town. They said Isabel's life inside the gilded cage of the Thorne family was far from a fairy tale. She was a perfect doll displayed in a window, exquisite and empty. One evening, I paid a fortune for a ticket to a charity gala at the Met. I stood in the outermost circle of the crowd, a glass of champagne in my hand, my gaze cutting through the glittering throng to find her. She was thinner than I remembered. Her smile was flawless, professionally so, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes held a deep, profound exhaustion. A flock of society wives surrounded her, their compliments dripping with honey and their eyes glinting with envy and malice. Carter was nowhere to be seen, likely off with one of his flings. Halfway through the evening, she excused herself, murmuring something about needing fresh air, and slipped out onto a terrace. On pure instinct, I followed her. The wind was strong, whipping strands of her perfect hair across her face. She stood by the balustrade, looking out over the endless river of lights on Fifth Avenue, her shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly. She was crying. The proud, untouchable Isabel Sterling was secretly wiping away tears. My hand went to my pocket, to the clean, folded handkerchief I always carried. I wanted to walk over to offer it to her to tell her something, anything. But my feet were rooted to the spot. Who was I? Leo Vance, the nobody who got rich gambling on stocks. She was the moon. And the moon doesn't need comfort from the mud below. I stayed in the shadows, a coward, a voyeur. I just stood there, my body blocking the wind from hitting her, a useless gesture she would never know. After a long time, she composed herself, drying her eyes and reaffixing her perfect empty smile before turning back to the party. She never saw me. That night, I went back to my sterile penthouse and opened the safe. The yellowed plastic sleeve check sat there silent. I took out a leather-bound journal and wrote a single heavy line. One day I will stand beside you. Not as an admirer looking up. Not as a recipient of charity, but as an equal or maybe looking down. I began expanding my empire with a ferocious hunger. I was no longer satisfied with the quick, volatile money of the stock market. I moved into real estate, international trade, private equity. I became colder, more ruthless. Anyone who stood in my way was financially ruined or cast aside. I had to climb higher, faster. I was afraid of being too late. I was afraid that by the time I was worthy of standing in her light would have already gone out. Another 7 years passed quietly. A recession swept through the country, leaving a trail of bankruptcies in its wake. It was a year of big changes. The biggest news of all was the collapse of Sterling Industries. Isabel's father made a series of disastrous investments, leaving the family with a mountain of debt. The shock sent him to the ICU with a massive heart attack. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. Carter Thorne was the first to run. He held a press conference to publicly call off the engagement. He spewed lies to the reporters, claiming Isabel had been unfaithful, that the Sterlings had misrepresented their finances from the start. He washed his hands of the whole affair, burying Isabel and her family under a mountain of slander. I was in a board meeting when I saw the news flash on the screen. The fountain pen in my hand snapped in two. Black ink bled across my fingers. "Meeting's over," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, and walked out. I called in every favor I was owed, used every contact I had. I searched the city for her. The Sterling mansion on the Upper East Side was seized by the banks. Her cars, her clothes, her entire life was being auctioned off. It was like she had vanished from the face of the earth. 3 days later, one of my men found a lead at an underground poker club. The place was called the Devil's Cellar, a notorious den for high-stakes gambling and low-life criminals. When I kicked the door in, the air was thick with stale smoke and cheap perfume. And there at a back table, I saw her. For a second, my heart stopped beating. She was wearing a cheap crimson dress, the kind that was trying too hard. The slit went dangerously high up her thigh, revealing a dark, ugly bruise. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was smeared. A group of brutish-looking men were crowded around her, their laughter filled with vulgar suggestions, their hands roaming freely. "Come on, Miss Sterling, drink up." A bald, sweaty man sneered, pushing a glass of dark liquor toward her. "Otherwise, who's going to pay for your daddy's hospital bills?" Isabel sat there motionless, her eyes terrifyingly blank. She was a porcelain doll that had been broken. Her hand trembled as she reached for the glass. It was the look of absolute despair, the look of someone who had given up every last shred of dignity just to survive. A primal rage surged through me. That was my moon. How dare these animals lay their filthy hands on her? Bang! I kicked the private room's door off its hinges. The sudden explosion of noise silenced the room. I strode forward, snatched the glass from Isabel's hand, and smashed it against the floor. Shards of glass and liquor sprayed across the filthy carpet. "Who touches her?" I snarled. The bald man, stunned for a second, flew into a rage. "Who the hell are you? You got a death wish?" I didn't waste words. I grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from the table and brought it down squarely on his head. Blood erupted from the gash. "My name is Leo Vance," I said, my eyes sweeping over the other men. They were frozen in place. "Anyone else?" The hired muscle in the room started to move, but they were neutralized and on the floor before they took 2 steps, courtesy of my own security team who had followed me in. The casino fell silent. The only sound, the whimpering of the bald man on the ground. I turned back to Isabel. She was cowering in her chair, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. She didn't recognize me. In her world, Leo the valet had never existed. To her, I was just another predator, a more dangerous one, coming to claim my prize. Her body was trembling, her gaze filled with a familiar fear. That look pierced me deeper than any knife. I took off my suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering the cheap red dress and the bruises. "You're coming with me," I said, holding out my hand. She didn't move. She just bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes. "I bought your father's debt," I said, forcing my voice to be cold hard to hide the ache in my chest. "From now on, you belong to me." I put her in my car, a black Maybach, even bigger and more luxurious than the Bentley from that night. The silence in the car was heavy enough to crush a man. Isabel huddled in the corner, her hands clutching the lapels of my jacket, her knuckles white. She kept her head down, refusing to look at me. The car glided smoothly through the city streets, but couldn't penetrate the wall she had built around herself. "What do you want?" she finally whispered, her voice raspy, laced with a dead, resigned calm. She assumed the worst. After all, what else did she have left to offer but her body? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my coat and pulled out a worn black leather wallet. From a hidden compartment, I carefully removed the plastic sleeve check. A decade of being carried next to my heart had yellowed the paper and softened its edges, but the elegant looping signature was still clear. Her signature. I held it out to her. Isabel stared at it, confused. Her eyes darted from the check to my face, then back again. Suddenly, her pupils contracted. A flicker of recognition, a memory violently unlocked. The storm in 1994, the muddy valet, the eyes filled with a terrifying mix of hatred and ambition. She remembered me. "You," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. The pathetic insect she had saved with a casual act of pity was now the master of her fate. I reached down and lifted a steel briefcase onto the seat. With a flick of the latches, I opened it and turned it upside down over the console between us. A river of red-banded $100 bills cascaded out, piling into a small mountain of cash. It was crude, it was direct, and it was powerful. I reached out and gently took her chin, forcing her to meet my gaze. Miss Sterling, I said, my thumb stroking her soft skin, feeling the tremor that ran through her. That tip you gave me, I'm returning it with interest. The rules are different now, I said. The words I had rehearsed in my mind for 10 years, finally spoken. I make them. I expected to feel a sense of triumph. I expected to see shame, regret, fear in her eyes, but I didn't. All I saw were her tears. Fat, silent tears rolled down her cheeks, splashing onto the stacks of money. She cried without making a sound. A sight that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. She didn't beg. She didn't bargain. She just looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw an emotion I couldn't decipher. Was it relief or a new, deeper kind of despair? What are you going to do to me? She asked. I looked at her face, still hauntingly beautiful, even in its ruin. I wanted to say I love you. I wanted to say I've waited 10 years for you, but the words wouldn't come. I was Leo Vance now, a titan of Wall Street, not Leo, the broken valet. I had my pride, and more importantly, she had hers. What little was left of it? To speak of love now would be the ultimate humiliation. You'll be my mistress, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Until I get bored. Isabel closed her eyes, another tear tracing a path down her cheek. Okay, she whispered. She had no other choice. I dropped my hand and turned to look out the window. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass, cold, impassive, a mask of stone. Only I knew that beneath the surface, my hands were shaking. I finally had her in the cruelest, most desperate way imaginable. The car pulled up to a glass penthouse overlooking Central Park. This was the most expensive real estate in the city. From the terrace, you could see the entire glittering expanse of Manhattan. I remembered hearing once that this was her favorite view. Back then, I could only look up at these buildings from the street below. Now, I owned the view, and I was giving it to her. Isabel walked into the sprawling apartment, her body rigid with tension. She took in marble floors and minimalist luxury with a completely numb expression. Her face was a canvas of dread, expecting the inevitable transaction. I pointed to the master suite at the end of the hall. Go take a shower. She nodded meekly like an automaton and walked up the floating staircase. Watching her slender, defeated back, my chest tightened. I made a call to my private physician. When she's done, I need you to check her for injuries. Be discreet. The doctor sounded surprised, but agreed. I didn't enter the master bedroom that night. I sat in my office in the dark until dawn. The ashtray overflowed. The room was choked with smoke. I watched the city lights, thinking about the past 10 years. Every fight, every risk, every sleepless night. I had brought my moan back from the darkness. But now I was terrified to touch her. I was afraid one touch would shatter her completely. Beneath the armor I had built around myself, I was still just that kid. It turns out even the most ruthless man is a coward in front of the woman he loves. The next morning, Isabel came downstairs wearing one of my white dress shirts. It was far too big for her, hanging off her frame, making her look even more fragile. The bruises on her arms had been cleaned and bandaged. Her face had a little more color. She flinched when she saw me at the dining table. Eat, I said, motioning to the breakfast spread out before her. A bagel with lox and cream cheese, fresh fruit, the things I'd overheard her order once at a cafe years ago. She sat down cautiously, picked up her fork, and began to eat one small mechanical bite at a time. As she ate, tears began to fall again. What is it? Is the food not good? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Mr. Vance, she whispered. Thank you. It was the first time she had called me that. After breakfast, I took her to the hospital. Her father was still in the ICU. The hospital administrators had delivered an ultimatum, pay the outstanding bill, or they would discontinue care. I had the chief of medicine meet me in the hallway and handed him my Black Centurion card. Use the best drugs. Fly in the best specialists in the world if you have to, I commanded. As long as he wakes up, money is no object. The doctor, bowing and scraping, rushed off to make the arrangements. Isabel stood watching her father through the glass, his body hooked up to a dozen machines. Her shoulders shook with violent sobs. Suddenly, she turned and dropped to her knees in front of me. The sound of her knees hitting the polished marble floor echoed in the quiet hallway. Leo, thank you. God, thank you. She choked out, bowing her head so low her forehead almost touched the ground. I was stunned. I dropped to one knee and immediately pulled her up. She felt so light, so fragile, it terrified me. Don't you ever kneel to me, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I looked her directly in the eyes. Isabel, you need to understand something. I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm here to repay a debt. That check you gave me all those years ago, it saved my life. Now I'm saving yours and your family's. After this, we're even. What I wanted to say was, we'll never be even. I want to be tangled up with you for the rest of our lives. But looking into her tear-filled eyes, I held back. One step at a time, Leo, I told myself, you have a lifetime to melt the ice around her heart. Isabel Sterling was not the kind of woman to be kept. The pride of her family, the fire of her spirit was still there, buried under the pain. After a few days, she came to me. I want to work, she said, her eyes clear and determined for the first time. I don't want any charity. I want to pay you back. My first instinct was to tell her it was ridiculous that my fortune was so vast, she could never spend it all. But then, I remembered the woman she used to be, a brilliant, award-winning jewelry designer. I couldn't be the one to clip her wings for good. All right, I said. I gave her the position of chief designer at my company's luxury jewelry division, Vance & Company. Jewels, the largest in the city. Everyone in the office knew her story. The fallen socialite, the charity case, who had slept her way into a corner office. The whispers followed her everywhere. I knew she overheard them in the break room talking about her, calling her shameless. She never fought back. She just quietly got her coffee and walked away. She was stronger than I ever imagined. She poured all her pain and passion into her work, sketching designs late into the night. I saw it all, and it killed me not to intervene, but this was her fight. She had to be the one to win it. The breaking point came at the annual industry gala. I took her as my date. She wore a black floor-length gown I had custom-made for her, and around her neck was the first piece she had designed for the company. She was, without exaggeration, the most beautiful woman in the room, and her beauty drew attention. All kinds of it, including Carter Thorne's. The bastard sauntered over with a young, vapid model on his arm, a glass of champagne in his hand. Well, if it isn't my dear former fiancée, he sneered, his eyes shamelessly raking over Isabel's body. Didn't take you long to find a new sugar daddy, did it? He turned to me. Honestly, Vance, I'm surprised you pick up my sloppy seconds. You're not worried about where she's been. The people around us fell silent, watching the drama unfold. Isabel's face went white. Her entire body started to tremble. Her fingers dug into my arm. Her nails practically breaking the skin. I could feel her terror, her humiliation. And in that moment, the animal I kept locked deep inside me broke free. I gently removed her hand from my arm and took a step forward. I didn't say a word. I just swung. My fist connected with Carter Thorne's jaw with a sickening crack. He flew backward, crashing into a champagne tower. Glass shattered everywhere. Champagne drenched his expensive suit. He lay on the floor, sputtering, blood pouring from his mouth. I had knocked a tooth out. A dead silence fell over the entire ballroom. The model shrieked and scrambled away. Carter struggled to his feet, pointing a bloody finger at me. Vance, you hit me. Do you have any idea who I am? I calmly straightened my cuffs, then let my gaze sweep across the room, a silent threat to anyone watching. Finally, my eyes landed back on Carter's pathetic, swollen face. I don't give a damn who you are. I walked back to Isabel's side, wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders, and pulled her close. Listen up, I said, my voice low but carrying through the silent hall. She's my line in the sand. You mess with her, you mess with me. And if anyone here ever speaks about her with disrespect again, I will personally ensure they never speak again. Understood? Carter Thorne, the great heir, shrank back, silenced by the raw menace in my voice. I let out a short, sharp breath of contempt, then turned and guided Isabel out of the ballroom. As we walked away, I felt her stop shaking. She looked up at me and in her eyes there was a light I had never seen before. Isabel's father took a turn for the worse. The doctor said he needed an immediate kidney transplant or he wouldn't last a month, but the official transplant list was a mile long. The wait could be over a year. Isabel was frantic. She spent every night at the hospital, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow from exhaustion and worry. Watching her fade away like that, a cold fury settled in my heart. I called on everyone, my legitimate business partners and my contacts in the city's criminal underworld. I put the word out. $100 million cash for a matching healthy kidney. No questions asked. For weeks, I barely slept. My days were spent putting out the fires of my legitimate businesses. My nights were spent navigating a shadowy world of criminals and opportunists. Finally, on a dark, stormy night, the call came. They had found a match in Thailand. I drove straight to the penthouse, my heart pounding to tell her the news. I found her curled up on the sofa in the dark, staring at an old photograph of her father. Outside, thunder cracked and lightning lit up the sky. She'd always been afraid of thunderstorms. With every boom, her body flinched. I walked over and gently sat behind her, wrapping my arms around her. "They found one," I whispered into her ear. "They found a kidney. Your father's going to be okay." Isabel froze for a second, then whipped around, grabbing the front of my shirt. "Is it true, Leo? Are you lying to me?" "I'm not lying. A private jet is on its way right now. The surgery can happen tomorrow." A raw, broken sob escaped her lips. But this time, it wasn't a cry of despair. It was a cry of pure, overwhelming relief. She threw herself into my arms, burying her face in my chest, holding on to me like I was the only solid thing in her world. I held her, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was the first time she had ever held me like this. The storm raged outside, but inside the atmosphere had shifted. Neither of us spoke. We just held each other, finding warmth and solace in the embrace. My shirt was damp from the rain, and it clung to my skin, revealing the network of old scars that crisscrossed my chest and torso. The scars I had earned in my tough days. Isabel's fingers lightly traced a long, faded scar near my heart. "I got that one fighting for a piece of turf on the docks." "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice soft, her eyes filled with a tenderness that made my breath catch. "Not anymore," I said, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "To be strong enough to protect you. No pain is too much." I looked in her eyes and told her everything. I told her about the docks, about the stock market, about the lonely nights spent staring at her check, making a promise to myself. I told her how I clawed my way out of the mud, driven by the singular goal of seeing her again. As I spoke, the tears returned to her eyes. She finally understood the weight of my obsession, a weight I had carried with my own blood. She reached up, her hands cupping my face, her gaze incredibly soft. Then she leaned in and pressed her lips gently against the scar on my chest. That kiss was like a bolt of lightning striking straight through my soul. It was acceptance. It was gratitude. And it was the beginning of love. The next day, the surgery was a complete success. Isabel's father was out of danger. We stood together outside the recovery room and she looked at me and smiled. A real genuine smile. In that moment, I knew every second of the last 10 years had been worth it. Peace did not last long. The Thorne family was old money, wounded, but not dead. Carter, out on bail and hungry for revenge, partnered with an international money laundering syndicate to set a trap for me. Suddenly, my company's credit lines were frozen. Banks called in their loans. Suppliers demanded payment and blockaded my warehouses. To make matters worse, an anonymous tip led federal agents to my door, accusing me of smuggling and financial crimes. I knew it was Carter's doing. He didn't just want to beat me. He wanted to destroy me. That night, my penthouse was surrounded by creditors and reporters. I called Isabel into my study. I handed her a cashier's check. The number on it was many times larger than the one she had given me. "Take this and go," I said, turning my back to her, my voice a cold monotone. "My company is finished. I'm probably going to prison. I can't afford to keep you. Get out. Don't let this mess drag you down, too." I had to make her leave. The fight ahead was going to be ugly. I couldn't let her be in the line of fire. Carter was after me, not her. If she was gone, she would be safe. I heard the sound of tearing paper. Rip! Rip! The check worth a fortune was being torn into pieces. I spun around. Isabel stood there, her eyes blazing with the fire of a lioness. "What do you think you're doing, Leo?" she demanded. "Do you really think I'm the kind of woman who only stays when things are good?" She walked right up to me, her chin raised in defiance. "Wherever you are, that's my home," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "If you go to prison, I'll wait for you. If you die, I'll bury you." Her words shattered my carefully constructed facade. I pulled her into a desperate embrace. Holding her so tightly, I thought our bones might fuse together. "You fool," I choked out, my voice thick. "You will regret this." "No," she said, pulling back slightly. "I won't." She reached in her purse and pulled out a small USB flash drive. "What's this?" I asked, confused. "My family may have gone bankrupt," she said, her eyes turning to ice. "But my father wasn't stupid. This is every piece of evidence of the Thorne family using my father's shipping company to launder their money for the last 5 years, including their offshore ledgers. I was keeping it as an insurance policy. Now it's our weapon." I stared at the small piece of plastic in her hand. My heart soared. This was it. The silver bullet. With this, Carter Thorne was finished. We prepared for war. Isabel used her old connections, the ones from her socialite days, to discreetly contact influential journalists she could trust. My job was to play for time, to keep Carter and the feds occupied while she set the stage. For those few days, we were soldiers fighting side by side. The barriers between us, the history, the pain, it all melted away. All that was left was a profound, unspoken trust. On the night before the final move, we sat in my empty, darkened office, eating instant ramen out of paper cups. Isabel looked at me and smiled a little. "Leo," she said, "if we win, what's the first thing you're going to do?" I thought for a moment. "I'm going to ask you to marry me," I said, my voice completely serious. A blush crept up her neck. She looked down and took a sip of her broth. "Then you'd better win." Everything went according to plan. The next morning, the story broke. It was everywhere. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, every major news network. Thorne empire built on crime, laundering, bribery, extortion. The evidence was irrefutable. The city was in an uproar. Federal agents swarmed the Thorne Tower downtown. Carter tried to flee the country. I was waiting for him at the airport when he saw me standing there, flanked by FBI agents. He collapsed. "Vance, you set me up," he shrieked. A pathetic broken man. I looked down at him the same way he had once looked down at me in the rain. "This isn't a setup, Carter," I said quietly. "This is karma." He was led away in handcuffs, destined for a long, long time behind bars. The Thorne family's assets were frozen and in the ensuing fire sale, systematically acquired by my company. I had won. I was no longer just a player. I was the king. A massive victory party was held at the most extravagant hotel in the city. Everyone was there waiting to kiss the ring of the new financial titan. But I didn't show up. I took off the expensive suit, put on a simple jacket and jeans, and drove to the place where the Alliance Club used to be. It had been torn down years ago. Now it was just a small empty park. It was raining that night, a steady, quiet drizzle just like 10 years ago. I stood there in the rain, looking at nothing, feeling a strange emptiness. I had conquered the world, but I had never felt more alone. Suddenly, an umbrella appeared over my head. I turned. Isabel was standing there holding it for me. She was wearing a simple trench coat, her hair slightly messed up by the wind. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She hadn't gone to the party. She had come to find me. "What are you doing hiding out here?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked at her and a lump formed in my throat. "I was just wondering," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "if the valet from all those years ago is finally good enough for you." It was the insecurity I had carried for a decade. Even now, with all the money and power, when I looked at her, I could still feel the mud and rain on my face. Isabel smiled. A gentle smile, and then she let the umbrella fall to the ground. The rain immediately soaked us both. She stepped into my space and wrapped her arms around my neck, holding me tight. Rain and tears mingled on her cheeks. "You idiot," she whispered into my chest. "You don't have to be good enough for anyone. The moment you saved me in that casino, the moment you saved my father, the night you held me during the storm, you were always my hero, Leo." At that moment, I felt like I truly owned the world. And we kissed right there in the rain. No crowds, no fame, just two souls finally finding their way home. A month later, I bought the old Sterling family mansion back at auction. I hired the original architects to restore it to its former glory, exactly as she remembered it. I even had the gardens replanted with the same type of roses her mother used to love. When I placed the old iron keys in her hand, she cried like a little girl. It was her home again. It was our home. Isabel started designing again. She launched her own bespoke jewelry line. She called it Renaissance. The debut piece was a necklace named Fate. It was a delicate platinum scroll designed to look like a rolled-up check studded with a single perfect diamond. It became an instant sensation. Everyone in the city knew the story behind it. Our story. We were married in the garden of that house. There were no media, no business partners, no social snobs. Just the two of us and her father, who was now out of the hospital and beaming from his wheelchair. I stood under a trellis of roses, wearing a custom suit she had helped design. She walked toward me in a simple, elegant white dress. The sunlight caught in her hair, and she looked like a dream I never thought I'd be allowed to have. I slipped a ring onto her finger. It was a flawless pink diamond. It had belonged to her mother, but the Thornes had seized it to cover the debt. I had spent a fortune to track it down and buy it back. I got down on one knee. "Isabel," I said, my voice shaking. 10 years ago, you gave me a check that saved my life. Today, I'm giving you that life and everything that comes with it. It's all yours. Isabel pulled me to my feet, her fingers lacing with mine. Her eyes were shining like the stars. Mr. Vance, she said, a playful smile on her lips. The rest of my life is yours to manage. After the ceremony, we drove to the top of the Empire State Building. We stood on the observation deck, the entire city sprawling beneath us, a glittering tapestry of light and ambition. The wind was cool and carried the distant sound of sirens. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a new check. I had signed over my entire personal fortune to her. I tucked it into her hand. This time, I said, gently tapping the tip of her nose, I'm the one giving the tip. The term is one lifetime. Isabel looked down at the check, then back up at me. She broke into a laugh, a sound more brilliant than all the city lights combined. So, she teased, the rules are still whatever you say they are. I pulled her into my arms and kissed her. No, I whispered against her lips. From now on, the rules are whatever my wife says they are. The night was soft and the future was ours. The valet who wandered in the rain finally embraced his own moon.